Hi, we're back to Veterans Voices. Nathan Johnson, host of the show here, along with Dennie Briggs and Rod Odgers, two Navy veterans. And this is a Veterans Voice segment. And so, Dennie and Rod, thank you for being here today. And I know a little bit about you, but let's start off. Just give us a real brief overview of your service in the military.
Well, I was actually in two times. I was in the Navy near the end of World War II, and then I got out and went to college under the GI Bill, and then I received a commission as a psychologist. I came back in during the Korean War, and I was on active duty for 8 years after the Korean War.
So overall, about 10 to 12 years of service then?
15.
15 years.
Yeah.
Wow, fantastic. And Rod, tell us about your service in the military.
I served went to boot camp in San Diego, and that took me out of Michigan totally. I was chosen to go to corps school, to hospital corps school, and that was not what I wanted, but I did, and I went to the corps school, and then I was sent up to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, and where I met Dennie, and I worked in the psychiatric unit there.
The two of you met and served in the Navy together, and here you are today, almost 50 years later, or several years later, and you're still friends. So tell us a little bit about how you came to work together and what kind of bond you formed in the military, and then we'll go into how that continued through today.
Well, Rod and I met, I think it was about 1955, when we were stationed at the Oak Knoll Naval Hospital on the psychiatric service. Rod was the leading psychiatric technician on a ward that was sort of nicknamed the Brig Ward, because it was housed patients that the Navy's brig on Treasure Island couldn't handle. They were so disturbed, so they sent him to the hospital.
Okay.
Rod was the head corpsman on that ward. I was in a sort of research capacity where the admissions ward of the hospital, they were running a new program, and I remained on that program for about a year. And then they wanted to repeat this program closer to what might be a front. And so they chose the Naval Hospital in Japan, which housed and treated psychiatric patients from the Far East, Okinawa and Philippines, and aboard ships from the 7th Fleet. And so I was chosen to form a team and go there and set up an experiment.
So this must have felt very special then, to be a very hand-picked, unique group sent on this special assignment. What was it like to be picked by Dennie and to be a young sailor and head over to Okinawa for this special mission?
So I got to see all kinds of mistreatment, actually, of a lot of our veterans. People who were there and I was assigned to a different ward, and they were having different kinds of therapy, a lot of chemical therapy like insulin shock, and they were doing electric shock, and they were isolating people, and they were, I remember wrapping sheets around the patient, I remember, it was all pretty horrible to me. It was pretty confining and frightening to me if I were ever in that kind of a situation.
Well, this must have been very early in the times of understanding mental health, and certainly pre-existing any type of maybe specific diagnosis.
And it was before the anorectic drugs. It was even before Thorazine and really quite dangerous kinds of procedures. Several of the patients died at Oak Knoll, and while we were there in insulin coma, where they couldn't resuscitate them out of the coma.
Wow.
So
very
it was
scary
a
too.
terrible place. And while we were at Oak Knoll, this one experiment on the ward, we were able to eliminate all these things. We had no electric shock, no insulin, no restraints, none of this sort of thing.
Okay.
We handled everything in the ward in groups.
I see. So through maybe the early interventions of talk therapy and sitting folks down and discussing what they were going through, was that the idea, the main strategy?
Yes.
And what was your overall goal? Were you trying to develop something as an alternative to what the Navy was already using? Were you specifically working on just the toughest, the hardest cases to crack, for lack of a better term? Or what was the main objective that you guys walked away from?
To me, it was to give everybody the same integrity, integrity of life, and hallucination was normal for some people. I mean, that's the way they operated. I remember some of the catatonic patients that would just sit there very rigid or lie there very rigidly and, not move, kind of thing. And these were all, to me, it looked like punishment more than it was, help or assistance, anything.
Were there any success stories? Did you see?
Oh, well,
did you see anyone that you helped who walked away healthy and maybe continued their service in the Navy, or at least able to go home and live a normal life?
Well, it's just one of them. I remember was a catatonic, and I didn't know anything about I had no college. I barely made it through high school, let alone going through to know any of this psychology of all this. But I just knew that this person was lying there. So I used to read to him, and I thought, well, he might be communicating somehow. And when he did start developing, leaving that, whatever that is, whatever they call that, he became very active in the ward for a while, and then he was discharged, and he used to write me letters, remembering everything that I did. So that in itself was bringing, how you could help somebody.
Right. Yeah, that's what I was just about to say. It sounds like you really connected with them as human beings, not as patients.
Right, exactly.
What about you, Denny? Any opportunities that you saw someone actually improved?
Yes, many. Our goal was not really to get as many back to duty as we could, but to get them to straighten their lives out. Whether they stayed in the military or got out, it didn't matter.
Right. More concerned about their general health.
Yes, yes.
And so, from these successes, how do you think that the mental health world advanced, or how, through your research or your direct practice, how did you see the care for our service members improve through the 50s or even through later years?
From these early studies, Oak Knoll was the psychiatric treatment center for the whole West Coast and the Far East. We treated about 500 at any one time, and the total service was converted into these kind of units. We did away with shock treatment. We did away with insulin coma and restraint, and ran these wards, like for normal human beings.
Yeah, fantastic.
And it spread to other naval hospitals.
Yeah.
I think nearly every naval hospital had at least one unit like this in time.
It became a best practice.
Yes.
Sounds like. So I thank you both for being on the show, Denny and Rod. Thank you for being here today and sharing your voice with us. And we'll be back with more Veterans Voices.